Peter Carey, the first time I interviewed you 11 years ago, you told me, quote, "Writing's a strange occupation for such an anxious personality. The only thing that can make me happy is taking risk. The only safety I have is risk." That's still the case?
I was smart in those days. Yeah, I think it is the case, yeah.
What was the risk of writing this book?
Oh, well, in case no one's noticed yet, but they don't actually seem to have. I actually have two American characters. And if you can imagine, this is somebody who was panic-stricken writing about Sydney when he really came from Melbourne. To actually have two characters from another culture who come to this country to look at all its weirdnesses and misunderstand it. It's very challenging, and I think I did it. So that was one scary thing. The other thing, the other risks in it are more, well, the next risk in it is to do with beginning with a very broad idea, which is I was going to have these two people. It was going to be the 70s. They were going to be on the run. They were going to end up in a sort of a hippie place in Queensland, and this was. But I didn't really know what was going to happen, and I didn't really know who they were.
But have you ever known how one of your books was going to end when you've started?
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever really known where it was going to take you?
Sometimes. It was the only thing I knew. I mean, Oscar Lucinda, all I knew about it really was there was going to be this glass church going along this river and like a box full of Christian stories going through a landscape of Aboriginal stories. And that's all I knew, not who put it there or why they put it there or how that would happen. So all I knew in the whole, as I started to invent the Lucinda, who was the heiress who inherits the glass factory, and somehow that this Church of England clergyman who's somehow a rebel, which is very hard to make a Church of England clergyman a rebel against something. I discovered Oscar and Lucinda, and then I had the whole book was sort of really planned on getting him to that one thing that I knew about.
Much more recently, you've said that you finally worked out what has always driven you to write, to make something very beautiful that never existed in the world before. So what's the thing of beauty in this book that you've created?
Well, I think it's, since Ned Kelly particularly, I think, I've become more and more interested in the sentence and in the business of just slashing away everything that I don't need, nailing the remainder together and hoping to sort of get a new sort of voice or a new rhythm that's very spare and sort of exhilarating for being unexpected. And I'd hope that this book's sort of full of it.
So beauty in the language rather than necessarily the story?
Yes, story. Well, one discovers story and one discovers language. But language particularly. I mean, language, you know, when books are reviewed, people spend an awful lot of time doing, you know, plot synopses and everything. But a plot synopsis tells you nothing about what the art of the book is. And, of course, the art is contained in the arrangement of the letters and the arrangements of the words and what they do and how they feel. So that's the river the reader is swimming in. And that's what's got to be beautiful and new and never have existed before.
You started by talking about the risk of these two American characters that you placed in Queensland. After 17 years in New York, you still write far more about Australia than your chosen home now. Surely after nearly 20 years, you would think you'd be drawn to write something more substantial about the country you now live in.
Yes, except that we are made firstly by our childhood. So when does that end? Let's say when we're 15 or something.
It never
leaves you.
Yeah.
You know, and you think of all those people. Well, I think about Manhattan in this case. No, but you know, at the end of the day, you think of all these people, you know, lying on couches talking about their childhood. We're full of our childhoods, and I lived in this country almost continuously until I can't even remember. Well over 40. So I'm made by that. And if I wanted to be something else, I couldn't really do that. And the way I think about myself is the way I grew up as an Australian, and one still, you know, I like New York because New York is a city of foreigners. The city's full of people with their hearts in at least two places, and it gives us all sorts of interesting connections.
Tell me about Peter Carey, the teacher.
Well, when I first went to New York City, I thought it was just a complete scam, really, which was get a green card, and none of my students got any better, and that seemed to prove it to me. And then later I got better, and the students started to get better. So that's something. The students that I have now tend to be older, They would be sort of late 20s, 30s. They will have been around the block a few times. All sorts of stuff will have happened to them. They will have already made that sort of risky mistake that they really want to be a writer, even though their life can go to hell in a handbasket because of it. They're smart. They're talented. They're all different. They come from all sorts of different backgrounds.
And you do it in small groups, don't you?
From about 12, well, I have just 12 students. Yeah. I line edit them. You know, we do 2 stories a week. I line edit them intensely. So I will read their whole, we just do 20 or 30 pages, but I will go through every word. We'll discuss them. They get better. They start to understand, I don't sit down and give everyone talent to start with or anything like that. So we work on, there are things you can learn. Order of release of information, characterization, so on. And they get better and better. And as they realize as a group what's happening, they all sort of levitate. They raise themselves up in the process. It's very exciting.
It's interesting. You're almost the teacher in reverse. That there would be the teacher who starts full of passion and who slowly becomes disillusioned with the system they find themselves in. You've kind of done the opposite.
Yeah, there's an American writer, a dear friend, Mona Simpson, and Mona and I used to teach together and say, God, we've got to read all this crap. We should be reading great literature and that would be making us better writers. But I think now, 18 years later, I think that the work I do with these students really returns to me an enormous amount, not just emotionally, which is considerable, but just at the level of the sentence. I think I'm a better writer for having been a teacher.
And Pieter Cary in his 60s, as opposed to your 50s or your 40s, still no sign of slowing down. Certainly outwardly there isn't.
Now, many people wish I would just calm down a little bit and be quiet, but I'm incapable of doing that for the moment, no.
You've also said in the past, making a book is dark and muddy. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, the dark... that sounds like I was talking about something emotionally dark, but there is a sort of a muddiness. It's where you're trying to push things around to find out what it is that you meant when you said that. You don't necessarily understand your own reasons for wanting to do that. You can have a character that you might want to do something that's sort of symbolically accurate, but in terms of character and motivation it makes no sense, and you might work and work and work to finally find out why they're doing that, and in finding out why they're doing that, find out a whole big idea in your novel. So there's a sort of a sea of confusion. At the same time, one has a compass, and one's not stupid or drunk, so one's heading towards a conclusion that one hopes makes some sort of sense. But there's an awful lot of being in the dark and being in the mud. And, of course, that's why, at the end of it all, it's such a miracle that you've got something with form and sense to it.
You've referred to being able to produce wisdom on a page that you don't have in life. You must have accumulated some along the way,
Oh, I don't think so. I think we're like, it's like when you go to a dinner party, and you sit there and you come back and say, oh, I wish I'd said that. Well, when you're a novelist, you do that, you can have... It's like Groundhog Day. You can do it over and over and over again until you elevate yourself. And so I think one of the reasons writers, for the most part, are rather disappointing after we've read them is that they've spent a long time building this sort of staircase where one's understanding of things is way beyond what you have in normal life.
Are you still not capable, again, as you've once said, of having a happy ending? Because I would have thought with his illegal self, there's obviously a huge number of questions left hanging, but there is a moment.
Oh,
there is a moment at the end where they're happy.
Yes. So for me, that is
breakthrough.
That's an ecstatic ending for me. Yes, that's a happy ending.
Pieter Cary, thanks very much for talking with us.